Well, we are set to talk to Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute on KCMO 95.7 FM and streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. As always, welcome in on a Tuesday morning as we await the snow, which will be starting during the overnight hours, and we'll get anywhere from, it looks like, could be as low as 4 inches to, depending on where you're at, 10 inches on the high end. Let's welcome in Dave Trabert on KCMO. And I saw this story yesterday. It's where I want to start the conversation, Dave. Carol Markowitz, who writes for the New York Post but is on Fox News quite a bit, wrote an article about how one state is getting education right, and it's by going back to the basics. And that state is Louisiana. Louisiana has seen a great uptick and increase in their rankings when it comes to their scores in literacy and also in math, while many states are failing on that front. I know you've seen this story as well. What do you attribute that to, and what can Kansas and Missouri, for that matter, learn from this?
Good morning, Pete. In a word, the difference is leadership. Louisiana has a Governor Landry and legislative leadership that are all pushing in the same direction to put students first. It just really comes down to, you have to decide, are you going to do what's best for students, or are you going to side with the adults who really don't want change, because partly that means they have to admit there is a problem.
It sounds so easy, doesn't it? It sounds so easy. So do you think... Go ahead.
It's not easy, but it's simple.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not easy, but it's simple. Do you think that there is the appetite for that, at least on the Kansas side, when it comes to potentially overriding, say, a Governor Kelly veto on some type of legislation like what they're doing in Louisiana?
That's a tough call because we have, there may be a couple of Democrats that are starting to put students first. We've seen it in a couple other instances. The biggest challenge we face, obviously, Governor Kelly is going to veto anything that puts students first. She'll always side with the unions and the administrators. It really comes down to whether we can get enough Republicans to decide that students are more important than maybe not getting reelected. There's a lot of Republicans who just say, look, man, we're with you. We understand. But if I vote for this, I won't get elected. The superintendent will kill me. Well, what are you there for?
I agree. What are you there for? And that's where it's like, man, and there's some of this Republicans and Democrats where certainly they're more interested in their little state Senate seat or their state House seat than they are just doing right by the kids. Why did you run, right? I mean, that's what I would ask them to their face. Why did you run if you can't agree to come to common sense conclusions on stuff like this? When what we're seeing in this, like Louisiana, I mean, they are seeing their rankings skyrocket, going from 49th nationwide to 32nd in overall scores. I mean, that is a massive uptick. And like you said, it may not be easy, but it is simple in terms of what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, honestly, they've gotten better. Well, most other states have gotten worse.
Yeah.
So that does help move up the rankings pretty simply. But it's getting back to basics. Now in Kansas, we did pass the blueprint for literacy, which is getting to structured reading, the only thing that really works. But now we have something nice on paper, and that's the first step. Now we have to implement it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of concern about whether that is going to be implemented with a sense of urgency at the Department of Education. The regents are all in, but we have the legislature. There's an example of a legislative committee cut $10 million from the budget for implementing part of the training for structured literacy. Wow. I mean, come on. This has to be done with urgency and fidelity. Louisiana did the end to social promotion. Parents do not want, for the most part, I mean, maybe a handful do, but they don't want their kids promoted just because the school year is starting over. They want to make sure that they are reading and doing math at grade level before they move on.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of school districts in Kansas that still do that as a matter of policy. There was legislation introduced under Governor Brownback tried this. I think it was in 2015, and it was third grade reading. You have to be able to read by the time you read at grade level before you go to fourth grade, because that's the critical time when you transition from learning how to read to reading to learn. The bill didn't even make it out of committee because of opposition from the union and the State School Board Association and others, who basically said, if you do this, the kids will feel bad.
Yeah, nowadays, when you say transitioning out of fourth grade, it means a whole different thing to some people. I mean, that's the kind of world we live in. My gosh. Yeah. All right, Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute on KCMO. Take me through what's going on when it comes to property valuations. I know last week the Kansas Senate passed a constitutional amendment that limits the increase in taxable real estate valuations to 3% annually. This does not mean it's going to become law. So what's going on this front? Because we all know property taxes are an issue.
Well, the House has introduced its own constitutional amendment. There are some similarities, but there's three major differences. One is on the formula, where the Senate version is a fixed cap of 3% on appraised value. The House version is a rolling average of an unspecified number of years. What they would do is have voters approve some type of rolling average on the November ballot, and then the next year the legislature would decide how many years would go into that average. Both bills are written based on changing appraised values, but we'd like to see them change that to taxable assessed valuation, because there's a concern about getting away from appraising property at fair market value. So this way you could appraise it at fair market value, but with residential, then you are assessed at 11.5% of that. So change that from a taxable assessed valuation, limit that increase. But there's that big difference in formula. There's also a difference in the House plan only applies to residential real estate, whereas the Senate plan applies to residential, commercial, agricultural, vacant lots, all forms of real estate. And the concern there is that if you only apply it to residential, you could see a shift in the tax burden going to other classes of real estate. The third difference is the 1 year delay. The House plan delays it a year so the legislature can set the number of years in the average. What that does is it's basically an invitation to local governments to jack up assessments in that year while they're waiting.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So hammer them on 1 year knowing that the 3% cap is coming in.
Yeah.
That would be bad. I imagine that you are a proponent of the one that would apply to all forms of real estate and not just residential. That would be the Senate plan. Do you prefer that one?
The Senate plan adjusted for appraised taxable or taxable assessed valuation would be better. The House plan would be better than what we have now, potentially. But the Senate plan has more predictability to it.
Okay. All right. Well, I know they're going to be busy at it. We're not. I mean, this is not something that they're going to decide on anytime soon, right? You think this will go down to the wire there in Topeka?
Yeah, you're right. It's not going to be resolved soon. It's going to take a while. But the good thing is that both sides are talking about it. So, and I think that's because they really understand doing nothing is not an option.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good point. Dave, always great to have you on, my friend. Thanks for the insight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete.
All right. Dave Trabert on KCMO 95.7 FM, streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app.